So components of juxtaglomerular apparatus are the macular denser cells, and these cells are the columnar cells of the distal convoluted tubule, and they're able to sense low sodium in the urine that is passing in the distal convoluted tubule. Another component of juxtaglomerular apparatus are the modified smooth muscle cells of the afferent arterioles called the juxtaglomerular cells. Then we also have the extramesangial extraglomerular mesangial cells. So when you have low sodium in blood, there'll definitely be low sodium in the filtrate at the glomerulus, and when it gets to the DCT, macular densa will sense low sodium. And remember, low sodium in blood means the blood pressure is also low. So macular denser cells will sense this low blood pressure or low sodium and cause juxtaglomerular cells to produce renin. Then what does renin do? It causes angiotensinogen that is produced in the liver to be converted to angiotensin 1. Then what happens to that angiotensin 1? We have angiotensin converting enzyme produced in the lung. It will cause the conversion of angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. Angiotensin 2 has different effects. It is able to cause vasoconstriction, and when vessels constrict, you increase the total peripheral resistance. That way, you will increase the blood pressure. Remember, blood pressure is a product of cardiac output times peripheral vascular resistance. And that resistance, if you increase by vasoconstriction, you increase the blood pressure. Angiotensin 2 is, apart from vasoconstriction, angiotensin 2 can also trigger the production of aldosterone in the adrenal cortex. And aldosterone has receptors in the distal convoluted tubule. It will cause the reabsorption, increased reabsorption of sodium. And when you reabsorb sodium, you increase sodium in blood, you increase water. That way you increase the volume, and thus increasing the cardiac output. So when you increase cardiac output, definitely blood pressure will increase. Remember, blood pressure is a product of cardiac output times total peripheral resistance. So that's really the function of juxtaglomerular apparatus, to help regulate blood pressure. So then we go to the collecting tubules. This one's usually empty into the collecting ducts, and the ducts are usually lined by pale staining cells with distinct cell margins. So you have two types of cells: the principal cells that reabsorb sodium and secrete potassium at the same time. This is in response to aldosterone and ADH, that's antidiuretic hormone. Antidiuretic hormone, and as its name suggests, and it's antidiuretic, so it's against diuresis, so it causes increased permeability so that urine becomes more concentrated. So then we have the dark interconnected cells. These ones usually reabsorb potassium and secrete hydrogen. So the principal cells of the light cells reabsorb sodium and secrete potassium, while the dark interconnected cells reabsorb potassium and secrete hydrogen. The epithelium of the smaller ducts, what's the lining? Simple cuboidal, while in the larger ducts, you find the simple columnar epithelium. So you can appreciate the cuboidal with dome surface within the collecting tubules, and the lumen usually appears clear. So these are the collecting tubules. You can see the simple cuboidal epithelium. So then after that, from the collecting tubule, there's the collecting ducts, which have a bigger diameter than the collecting tubules, and the lumens are also clear. Okay, and this just shows you the collecting ducts of Bellini. So the collecting tubules then usually empty into the straight collecting ducts, which will form the papillary ducts, and then the papillary ducts will now converge at the apex of the papillae. Remember, the apex of the papillae is at the apex of the pyramid, and this will open at area cribrosa into a minor calyces. So from collecting tubules to collecting ducts to papillary ducts that converge at the papillae, and this open into minor calyces. So you can see ducts opening into minor calyces, then many minor calyces join to form a major calyx. So you can see ducts exiting at the area cribrosa on the papillae. Then the papillae, all of them open into minor calyces, Then minor calyces will join to form major calyces. Then we go to the excretory passages. Excretory passages such as the renal pelvis, the ureter, urethra, including the urinary bladder, they're lined by transitional epithelium. This is a special type of stratified epithelium. So minor calyces, major calyces, renal pelvis, ureter, bladder are lined by transitional epithelium, and the walls gradually thicken as you get near the bladder. So this is transitional epithelium. It's usually stratified epithelium made up of many layers, approximately 4 to 5, and these layers have the surface cells being dome-shaped or umbrella-shaped, and sometimes they can have 2 nuclei. Then this is followed by polygonal cells, and then the basal cells are usually cuboidal. Now, of note is you have the presence of the pedicels, okay? And all these epithelial cells or the transitional epithelium, like other epithelium, they lie on a basement membrane. So transitional epithelium is a stratified epithelium. It's also called uroepithelium. The shapes of the cell depend on the amount of stretching. So whether there is urine, the stretch will be more. So stratified, this transitional epithelium lines the urinary system, the ureters, the calyces, the bladder, and it's adapted whereby its adaptation is mainly the ability to stretch, expand, and it's waterproof. So you have 4 to 5 cell layers. The surface cells that are umbrella or dome-shaped, intermediate cells that are polygonal, and the basal cells that are cuboidal. So again, surface cells that are dome or umbrella-shaped, and they may be binucleate. Intermediate cells which are polygonal, and basal that are cuboidal. So again, dome-shaped, polygonal, cuboidal, basal cells, and the presence of the pedicels. So remember, when the bladder is relaxed, you actually appreciate the dome-shaped surface cells, and when it's stretched, the dome cells now become flattened. You can see, become flattened. So ability to stretch and expand. You can appreciate here the dome cells. So it means it's relaxed, and when it's stretched, they'll become flattened. So the renal pelvis and the ureter are lined by transitional epithelium, and deep under the epithelium is the dense lamina propria. So those two will form mucosa. So mucosa of the renal pelvis and ureter is made up of transitional epithelium and the dense lamina propria. After mucosa, you get to muscularis, that's made up of inner longitudinal and outer circular layers of smooth muscle cells. There could also be an outer longitudinal layer in the lower portion of the ureter. Then you get to adventitia. So renal pelvis and the ureter have 3 layers: mucosa, muscularis, and adventitia. The mucosa is divided into 2, transitional epithelium and dense lamina propria, while the muscularis is divided into inner longitudinal and outer circular smooth muscle cells. So this is the histology of the ureter. You can appreciate the dome-shaped cells. So you have your transitional epithelium, the many layers. So from the mucosa has transitional epithelium and lamina propria. Then you get to muscularis, where you have the inner longitudinal. So these are longitudinal sections of muscles, and outer circular smooth muscles, before you get to your adventitia, that would be connective tissue. So when you see an asterisk lumen stellate shape, most of the time is the ureter, if you are able to appreciate the transitional epithelium. So again, stellate-shaped lumen, dome-shaped surface cells, polygonal, intermediate, basal, cuboidal. So mucosa has transitional epithelium and lamina propria, followed by inner longitudinal and outer circular smooth muscles before you get to adventitia. So those are the features of the ureter. Then we go to the urinary bladder. It also has mucosa, muscularis, and adventitia. Mucosa again has transitional epithelium, although it's thicker than that in the bladder. There's definitely lamina propria, and then muscularis has 3 layers: an inner longitudinal, outer circular, and outer longitudinal smooth muscle cells. And these are usually, the muscularis or the urinary bladder is pierced obliquely by the ureters. The circular layer is thickened around the opening of the urethra, and this forms the internal sphincter of the urethra. So the circular smooth muscle layer is thickened at the opening of the urethra to form an internal sphincter. So the walls of the urinary bladder are made up of mucosa, which is transitional epithelium and lamina propria, followed by muscle. So you have inner longitudinal, then followed by circular and outer longitudinal before you get to adventitia. And in between the bundles of smooth muscle cells, you have dense irregular connective tissue. Again, mucosa made up of urothelium and lamina propria, then muscularis with 3 layers. Okay, so you can appreciate the 3 layers, and then adventitia, except over the fundus. Then we go to the urethra. Again, it has the 3 layers. The mucosa has transitional epithelium, and near the bladder, this transitional epithelium gives way to stratified squamous with patches of stratified or pseudostratified columna. So urethra has transitional epithelium and lamina propria. Then the muscularis has inner longitudinal and outer circular, unlike the bladder which has 3. This has inner longitudinal and outer circular. And remember, we talked of the smooth muscle cells at the base of the bladder around the origin of urethra, where they are modified or thickened to form the internal sphincter. The external sphincter of the urethra is formed by the skeletal muscle from the urogenital diaphragm. So internal sphincter is smooth muscle, external sphincter is skeletal muscle. That tells you that the internal sphincter is has involuntary control, while the external sphincter has voluntary control. So this is how the urethra looks like. So the lumen is also folded into stellate shape like the ureter. It also has transitional epithelium lying on a loose lamina propria, and then you have your muscularis that has 2 layers before you get to adventitia. Okay. So we go to the female urethra. It's lined by stratified squamous epithelium and areas of pseudostratified columnar epithelium. So basically, this is the urinary bladder with the ureters obliquely piercing the smooth muscle layer and the urethra down here. So the 2 of them, the 2 ureters and the ureters, if you join them, they form a trigone, and this is your trigone. You can see where the ureters are opening and where the opening of the urethra is. So these 3, when you join them, that's your trigone. And you can appreciate the urogenital diaphragm forming the external sphincter, while the smooth muscles will be modified at the neck to form your internal urethral sphincter. The smooth muscle of the urinary bladder are called the detrusor muscle. The mucosa of the bladder normally is thrown into folds, which we call the rugae. That's what you appreciate here. So then we go to the male urethra. Male urethra is longer than the female, is usually around 25 centimeters, while the female urethra is approximately 4 centimeters. So we have different parts of the male urethra. This is the prostatic urethra before you get to the membranous urethra. So all this is membranous. Then that's the penile urethra within the penis. So those are the parts of the urethra: prostatic within the prostate, and membranous where you have bulbourethral glands opening, and the penile urethra within the penis. So what are the parts of the male urethra? The prostatic, which is lined by transitional epithelium, the membranous lined by stratified or pseudostratified columnar epithelium, and the bulbar or penile, which has pseudostratified and columnar epithelium with stratified and squamous layer. So we have what you call Leyter's glands. These are mucus glands along the entire length of the urethra, but mostly in the pendulous part. Leyter's glands are just mucus glands. They are found on the entire length of the urethra, but mostly where do we see them? In the pendulous part of the urethra, in the penile urethra. Okay. This penile urethra is lined by pseudostratified and columnar with stratified and squamous areas. Thank you.